And yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from New Mexico, Ms. Stansbury, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, it's always interesting to come to these hearings, especially after we've had many, many hearings on the same subject, and especially 2 weeks after a massive bill passed and was signed into law by the president in the Big Ugly Bill, which had major policy reforms to the actual policies that we're here to discuss. And 2 weeks certainly isn't even time to begin to implement those changes. So I guess my question is, when is enough enough? Why do we keep coming back to the well to discuss the same things over and over and over again? And I've worked in the field of water resources management and infrastructure, permitting, planning, and environmental reviews my entire career, over 2 decades. And so I've seen this conversation happen in a million different places, in a million different ways. And, my second question after when is enough enough is, what's the end goal here? Is the end goal to repeal NEPA, or is the end goal actually to solve problems in the permitting process? Because the data is very clear that the primary reasons why projects get delayed, as Mr. Mergen and others, and just the thousands and thousands of data points that we have on permitting delays, is that it's either delays that are caused by permittees themselves not submitting appropriate paperwork or studies or plans, or it has to do with a lack of appropriate staffing at these agencies. When I worked on the Hill and worked in OMB, I worked on these issues for years. In fact, I was part of one of the first permitting councils that was set up by the Obama administration as a career staffer at OMB. I was working on the Hill when FAST 41 was passed to reform the permitting process. I was here in this chamber in 2013 when literally the Republicans took the entire global economy to the brink and said if we did not get NEPA reform as part of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, the end of the world would happen. And here we are 2 years later, and they just got major reforms passed through reconciliation. So I'm like, what's the end goal, right? What is the end goal here? When NEPA was passed in 1969, it was a bipartisan bill. And the reason it was a bipartisan bill is because at the time, there were these massive dam projects being built all over the United States. There were massive mining projects. There were massive roads. There were huge federal actions that were impacting communities. Whole communities, for example, in inner cities were getting bulldozed for federal highway systems. You had, rivers that had cultural significance, and there were treaties on with tribes that were getting dammed, and the fisheries were being stopped. So the idea was that maybe we should take a minute before we approve these federal actions. Maybe we should take a minute and talk to the communities, find out how they feel about it, find out if there's resource conflicts with other extractive or other activities, find out if we want to preserve it because it has unique cultural value or environmental value, and then we make a decision. And the reason why it takes a long time is sometimes these projects are so complex. It takes a while to figure out whether or not this is the right course of action, because for millennia, this is how the earth operated and how cultures interacted with this landscape. And you don't want to make a snap judgment in 120 days or 90 days or whatever arbitrary permitting requirement this body might pass. But I think the part that I find particularly disturbing is that the things that I'm hearing across the aisle being put forward, like, for example, taking away the public ability for judicial review and comment, is exactly the stuff that they tried to shove into reconciliation, and which the parliamentarian ruled was non-germane. And the reason why it got stripped from reconciliation is because they didn't have 60 votes to pass it in the Senate to begin with. Because it's a bad idea. Because the whole concept of taking away public review is actually gutting NEPA. So what's the end game here? The end game is to gut NEPA. We all need to make permitting more efficient. But, I heard a lot of rhetoric today about we're not going to be able to build this infrastructure. I've been meeting with utilities for the last 2 weeks in the wake of the Big Ugly Bill passing. And you know what the number one threat to utilities is right now? It's the Big Ugly Bill, because they cut the federal subsidies for grid modernization. Every major utility and clean energy company and financial institution that holds equities
in real property in utilities right now is in financial crisis because of the big ugly bill that you passed 2 weeks ago to gut federal subsidies. So if you're concerned about infrastructure, about energy security, about making sure that Americans' utility bills are cheap, that we can get energy to market, then why do all of your policies seem to completely point in the opposite direction? That's my question. I yield back.